Level 1-4. 1. 1, 1, 1, 1. Shut up. 1, 1, 1. Shut up. 1, 1, 1. Shut up, McMillan! Constable Silver exclaimed, taking out his constable blade, and then pointing it right at McMillan's throat. Shut up, McMillan, or I swear to Fonda, I'll... Damn it, Silver, shouted Ranger Ruby. Why don't you just shut the hell up and put that thing away? And Constable Silver all but froze. After all, it was not every day that a ranger yelled at you. Silver's lower lip trembled ever so slightly. I'm sorry, Ranger, he said. It's just, well... 1, 1, 1... 1. Well, that! He said, cursing and pointing at McMillan. 1, 1, 1, 1. McMillan continued to catatonically chant as the transport coach continued to slowly plug away towards their final destination, Ogre Dungeon. For the last time, Silver, Ranger Ruby did his best to patiently explain. McMillan's just playing head games with you. He's just playing games with everyone, the whole kingdom, I think. He's just trying to make everybody think that Mr. Magic over there has one last magical cast up his sleeve, but he don't. He turned to McMillan. Ain't that right, McMillan? 1, 1, 1. Ruby then stuck his head out of the coach. He stuck his head out the transport window and shouted, How far are we from Jova, Blue? What? Maybe 5 hours. Maybe more, Blue said. Maybe if I push the horses a little, we'll get there quicker. Almost there. See? Ruby said. We're almost there. Constable Silver rolled his eyes and moaned. Almost there? He cried to himself. Since when does 5 hours? Since when does 5 hours mean almost there? 1, 1, 1. That's it! I'm gonna kill him! Silver screamed, taking out his sword, pointing it right at McMillan's neck, only this time with intent. And then Ranger Ruby exploded! Get back! He screamed, unsheathing his rune blade, now glowing with a burning hot fire spell embedded to it. The temperature inside the coach felt as if it began to double, triple even. Ranger Ruby stared down at the little constable, his eyes almost as hot as his fiery blade. And in response, Silver almost wetted himself. One more outburst like that, you little constable twerp, Ruby sneered. And things are gonna get really, really hot in here. You get me? But then his mood immediately changed. His personal temperature went back down to 0. Ruby calmed and resheathed his rune blade as if nothing major had just happened at all. Try facing a dragon sometime, he said sardonically. Or a legion of Hackett mechs from the Axum Squad. A wacko shouting the number 1 over and over again is nothing, Constable. But in all honesty, Silver heard only half of what the Ranger had just said. His eyes were still just too transfixed on what he had just seen. The burning hot blade of glowing fire. It was honestly the first time that Silver had ever actually seen any magic before, of any kind up close. And even though he did in fact live in a magical kingdom, the most magical of them all, as all the nobles and the politicians of the day liked to remind everybody, but the truth was, deep down, nobody in Autumn ever truly believed in magic until they finally saw the stuff up close for themselves. Until they finally saw it first-hand, in person. But why the number 1, Ranger? Silver dared his luck by asking. Why does he keep saying the number 1 over and over again? Ruby shrugged. Probably so you would ask that question. Probably because, like I said, McMillan, he just likes to play games. Head games. Look, I once actually went to Vimasi with this little turd back there back in the day, believe it or not. Young prodigy my foot, he turned to McMillan. You probably don't remember me, but I sure as hell remember you, little Garland, he said, then turning back to Silver. Anyways, get this. His roommate actually committed suicide his first year there. One day he just jumped off the tallest dorm building, like nothing, and went splat in the new courtyard. And get this, right while the whole school was enjoying themselves the annual Spring Picnic Festival. And from then on, the little shit acted as if he somehow convinced him to do it, to jump. Well, need I say, nobody ever dared rooming with McMillan again, that was for damn sure. But I bet you never heard that story back in the day, back when all the papers were kissing his charitable ass, all making him sound like the best thing ever since the 4 crystals. And Constable Silver went completely bug-eyed over this, becoming absolutely horrified by the story. He turned to McMillan and back to the Ranger. No, I don't remember hearing anything like that. Yeah, after that McMillan didn't have to worry about roommates again, he repeated. But the constable tried. Do you suppose that he might have actually what? Well, what? Have convinced him to... Oh, please, constable. There is no such magic under the sun, where you can convince someone to suddenly do a somersault off a building. True, McMillan always hated this particular bunky's guts. Kept complaining about him always playing the ocarina too early in the morning or something like that. But no, like I said, McMillan just plays head games and nothing more. Without a wand, he is useless. One. Ruby raised an eyebrow, then smiled. Nope, this is all just one great big last-ditch effort on his part to keep everyone scared of Big Bad McMillan. Mark my words, Constable, mark my words. Mark 'em good. This time tomorrow, the only magical wand McMillan will ever be holding again is an ogre's penis. A nice, big ogre's penis. Maybe two. I hope you like the taste of green, McMillan. I hope you do. Little bastard killed Ranger Benson after all. We joined up the Rangers together. Always cheated at dice, but otherwise a good elf. I knew his wife. One. Ruby rolled his eyes. Anyway, Silver, I'm gonna get some sleep. You try and do the same. Just count as ones like sheep. Bah! And Ranger Ruby shut his eyes and eased back in his chair. But there was no way in hell Silver was gonna sleep after a story like that. Fonda, no! No, for the rest of the trip, Silver did not take his eyes off McMillan for a second. But, for the briefest of moments, he swore he might have seen McMillan get out of his chair and... But clearly he must have been seeing things. Clearly it must have been from the lack of sleep. After all, Silver had only slept just a few hours the night before. How terrible. How truly terrible. One. But deep within the recesses of McMillan's mind... Ogre penises. Ogre penises, really? McMillan whimsically thought to himself as he continued to chant, and the coach continued to plug along to what was supposed to become his new royal home. Ogre penises, that's adorable. Ranger, whoever, adorable. But joke's on you, because one, I don't even remember you. You're incredibly forgettable. Two, I actually got 2 students to commit suicide, not 1. And finally 3, that fire a spell was pathetic. What a joke. Why, I would have light my ass hairs with that one. He chuckled from deep within the confines of his own madness. What were you trying to do, Ranger? Suntan me? Ha! Here, perhaps someday a real pro will show you how it's done. One. No, I don't think I'll have to be worrying about ogre penises. Thank you very much, he continued to inner monologue. Not after today. But your wife one day may not be so lucky, mark my words. Because... though on one hand, if McMillan had any regrets whatsoever about his so-called birthday party crimes, it was most certainly the fact that in the heat of the moment, no pun intended, he had actually in fact murdered his poor mama. Poor mother dear, burning her right down to a crisp, along with his fiancée and everyone else gawking and screaming and pointing within magical striking distance. More than anything, McMillan wished to Fonda that he did not kill his poor dear old mother that night. He wished to Fonda she was still alive, because were she still alive, that would mean that McMillan would get to kill her all over again. And actually take his time to savor it a little, perhaps. Savor the moment, the whore. But, to give credit where credit was due, if McMillan was anything, he was fair. McMillan still had to show a great amount of respect to dear Mummy, because after all, was it not she that had always taught him since a very young age? Was it not always she that had repeatedly drilled into his head over and over and over again the importance of making a good first impression? Because after all, you only got to make one. Ogre Dungeon, beware. Bastard, Nolan is a bastard. Shut up. Bastard, Nolan is a bastard. Please, will you just effing shut up? Bastard. Nolan tried again and again, but with every single step, it was the same old tune. Nolan is a bastard. A tune that Nolan knew all too well. Nolan is a bastard. A tune that was once a greatest hit back in its day. Back in the little emerald mining town of Naraharsh. Emphasis on the harsh. Always on the tip of every tongue of just about every single little elf, dwarf, and tiny ogre even. How'd you like the taste of the mud, bastard? Tee-hee! A tune that to Nolan, the worst part would always be that in the end, none of it was ever even true. Because in the end, it turned out that Nolan wasn't even a bastard. Urgh! Nolan gently growled to himself while giving his bloody, bandaged hand yet another good squeeze. Nolan is a bastard. I was never even a bastard, you bunch of idiots! He shouted, but deep down Nolan knew exactly who the biggest idiot of them all was. All those effing years, he lamented to himself, all those effing, fond-to-be-damned years, my whole life, and you dared to rub my face in it, Jeff! He cursed at the still unconscious and now 8 blocks away Jeff. Although he highly doubted that even Jeff knew the truth of it all, he highly doubted that even Jeff knew that Nolan would honestly have counted himself lucky, effing lucky, if a bastard was all that he was in the end, instead of a Nolan wanted to scream, but he just couldn't. The weight of it all made Nolan's head spin and spin. He felt dizzy, he suddenly felt nauseous and faint, and he damn near ended up collapsing upon himself and the ground, were it not for his trusty Boken stick still in his hand, after what had just occurred only moments before. Oh my father! His fittingly twisted and black Boken stick, one given to him by Sharperton himself on the day he first earned his Sergeant Grays, in command of nothing less than the newly formed IOD. Sharperton had handed it to him and decreed, in a manner befitting of Fonda himself, or perhaps Nefas, that put the fear back into them, Nolan. Put the fear back into them, Nolan. Put the fear back into them, so that they all may one day again know the nature of true dungeon fear. Let them look upon your face, and feel the wrath of this Boken stick of pure diamond wood, and let them all remember every fiend, every orc, moblin, dwarf, ogre, manling, and troll. Let them all remember that things can always get worse in Ogre Dungeon. Much, much worse. Yes, Sharperton. Nolan had vowed, while giving a holy bow and sounding like the mindless zealot that he once truly was, ready to fight Sharperton's unholiest and perhaps stupidest of wars. I should have told him to stick it, Nolan thought to himself in retrospect, as he continued to warble back and forth up onto his feet. I should have told him to, and then he realized what he had just said. Stick it, he said out loud again with a little chuckle. Get it? Easily by a mile, Nolan's first attempt at humor in a very long time. But even more profound, perhaps, it was also easily the very first moment that Nolan had ever allowed himself to consciously give voice to the fact and admit out loud to himself how much he had always truly hated Sharperton deep down. Stick it, he said to himself once more. And he would have most certainly laughed out loud a little harder if it weren't for the fact that such a funny little joke had been just recently played on him by the most unlikely of comedians. You know something, Nolan? You really are a bastard. You ever hear of a little place called Angels, Nolan? You little bitch, Jeff, Nolan said to himself. You great big blonde, stupid, pink frilly dress wearing. I swear to Fonda, one day I'll... But Nolan knew he would do nothing. Could do nothing, not anymore. Because Jeff may have been the one who ended up unconscious with X's in his eyes and drool coming out of his mouth all over his well-pressed constable uniform, but Nolan knew in the end exactly who had won. And if Jeff was somehow getting the better of him, what hope did Nolan have anymore? What hope was left for Nolan? Truly now, Nolan was dead meat. Just how the Fonda Nolan was ever supposed to get through today, he had no idea. He hadn't slept, he was having trouble walking, he was sweating all over like a strumpet in temple after committing the most serious act of constable brutality, ×3. He highly doubted that the other constables in Jova were going to take this one lightly. Not at all. Come shift's end, perhaps all the constables in Jova might start gunning for him. Simply getting locked up in the center of town may be the least of Nolan's concerns. McMillan was coming. He hadn't seen Sephora in years. He still simply couldn't bring himself to face her again. How could he? Look at his face! But perhaps the worst part of it all was, the absolute worst of it all, and perhaps the most funny, was the fact that maybe in the end it might not even matter whether or not Nolan got through today at all. It might not even matter in the end at all, thanks to the most impossible situation that Smitty's actions had single-handedly put him in. Damn you, Smitty! Fonda, damn you! Nolan said. Because just last week, just days before, Jeff had ever even thought it was a good idea to knock on Constable Sergeant Nolan's door and have the audacity to offer him a constable job as one of Jeff's cronies, that no good piece of shit Smitty had gone behind Nolan's back and easily had done the most heinous and despicable, unimaginably perverse thing that Nolan could ever imagine a turnkey or anyone else doing, maybe a fiend, but never one of his brothers in blue and gray. Smitty had gone completely AWOL one night, absolutely AWOL, and only by the purest of chances did Nolan ever catch him in the act, and thus saving Ogre Dungeon from what might have been one of the most serious of investigations, and yet still Still, in the wake of it all, at least half of Ogre Dungeon actually believed that it was in fact Nolan who was in the wrong, and not Smitty. That Nolan was the one who had crossed the most serious of lines in Ogre Dungeon, or in any dungeon for that matter. The ultimate of taboos being a fiend lover. Because yes, on one hand, as a turnkey, you never ever sided with a fiend over a key, no matter what. No matter what. That was just common sense right there. Lest you want to get labeled for the rest of your life as the lowest of the low of turnkey society. But Nolan had actually taken all of this one step further. Not only did Nolan side with a fiend, but he also beat the ever-living tar out of no less than 3 turnkeys, including Smitty. 2, wait for it, save a fiend. Nolan had sided with a fiend over his fellow turnkeys. And yes, this was true. Yes. This was most certainly the ultimate of dungeon taboos. But if you asked Nolan, attempting to murder an effing fiend, or effing anyone for that matter, was the ultimate of taboos. And not just in Ogre Dungeon, but everywhere. It all just seems so incredibly simple to Nolan, so black and white. You don't murder an ogre, you don't hang an ogre, and then try to make it look like a suicide. And yet still, there it was. There it was, thanks to Smitty, with each passing day, Nolan could honestly feel all of Ogre Dungeon slowly, day after day after day, turning against him. Him! Sergeant frickin' Nolan! Mr. Ogre Dungeon! Ogre Dungeon's top sergeant! Head of the IOD! Sharperton's right-hand elf! The hero of the whole fond-to-be-damned effing place! Believe it or not, Nolan actually had a statue of himself out front, right outside Turntable. How many times had Nolan actually saved and kept everyone safe in there? All those stupid, lazy, sluggish assholes. Half of them doing nothing more than collecting a stipend at the end of the week. How many times had Nolan compromised and sold off pieces of his effing soul just to keep that place safe? Just to make sure that everybody went home safe every night. That everybody went home okay. And yet there it was. Well, you wouldn't last one day without it, Nolan. Jeff's words continued to ring inside between Nolan's ears. And yet, there it was. And Nolan suddenly felt the dizziness, the wooziness, and the nauseousness all returning again, only this time it ended up in him vomiting up his entire breakfast. The eggs, the slices of lambness life, all finally coming up in the most violent and dramatic of fashions. Fuck you, Jeff. Nolan hissed between gurgles. Fuck you, Smitty. Fuck you, Sharperton. Fuck you, McMillan. Fuck you, Ogre Dungeon. Fuck you, everyone! Everyone! And then Nolan puked just a little bit more, just a spittle. He picked himself back up, and he did his best to just simply make the rest of the way into Jova in complete mental silence. Bastard, bastard! Almost complete mental silence.